Alright, the following video is my first attempt at producing and recording a podcast. As things do, first time you try something, you're gonna fail, and there's a lot of mistakes in there. But nonetheless, I hope you will thoroughly enjoy a conversation between me and a good friend of mine, Sean Young. We were colleagues together here in Shanghai for 4 years, and we're gonna talk about career, work culture here in Chinese game dev, and life. See you there. Sean, welcome to the first episode of, I don't know what the show's called yet, but first time in the studio since I opened up.
Thank you.
It's called Flying Juice Studio, by the way. We do sound, music, and voiceovers. Well, how do I introduce you? Apart from my good friend here in China.
Yeah, I'm Sean. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for having me in the studio. First of all, studio looks amazing. Very happy for you, very proud of you. Can't wait to see what you're going to do with it. By way of introduction, we go back to 2019, 2020, early 2020,
Yeah.
when we were both working in Yuzu. So we met in the video games industry. Yeah.
First of all, you're not a designer. You are in marketing.
Yeah, we do completely different things. So, you were plugged in with your headphones all day, doing all things sound. And I actually had to speak to people because I was a marketing guy. So I was working with a Chinese team, but we were working on overseas marketing campaigns. When I was at Yuzu, it was predominantly the US, but then also a bit of work in Europe. And so, we had a team. We were working with the operations guys, the devs guys, and then also external partners and agencies on the ground in the US.
Mm-hmm. How do you think the landscape of the game stuff changed since 2020 or since you started?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a huge amount of changes. And, for anyone watching this, you'll probably have picked up on some general trends in the news, right? There's things from monetization to the way games are developed. I think development timelines have shifted hugely. There's so much more pressure on devs now to get content out in shorter and shorter periods of times. Especially in my job in the marketing and the PR role, the way we speak to players has changed as well. I mean, I remember when I first started in the industry, it was the bigger the star, the better. How many followers do they have? How many subscribers do they have? And then that promotion process has evolved and matured now to work with much more niche and specialized influencers. And what I believe that is the result of the players having greater trust in the knowledge of those influencers, rather than just, some 12-year-old kid blasting out different advertisements every week to his 30 million subscribers, right?
I think you've mentioned that in your last project, you worked with Markiplier.
Yes.
Not a small YouTuber by any means,
Yeah.
but still, I don't know, maybe just my opinion, but he's still quite niche. Like, I don't think everybody will watch Markiplier.
Yeah, Markiplier was an interesting one. So that was after I'd left Yuzu and I'd gone to Lilith. And Markiplier is still very popular with gamers. I'm going to say it how it is. He's still kind of nerdy, and he loves to game. So I think he resonated really well. And what was really interesting about that project was we gave him a brief and a conceptual overview, and he completely ignored it. And for like a month, we didn't hear from him. And we were like, oh, God, we have no idea how this is going to turn out. And it worked brilliantly. But working with Markiplier was so interesting because you just had to give him that creative freedom to get on with it and trust him. And I think if you give someone like him a very constrictive brief, it's not going to work well. What worked well there was giving him the trust and the creative freedom to just go and do this crazy project. And if you search Markiplier AFK Arena, it's one of the most brilliant pieces of content on his channel. But we had no idea how it was going to turn out. But to answer your question, yeah, he's not a niche YouTuber. He is obviously huge, but he still fit the bill for that project really well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's got so much personality to bring to like any content that he makes. And the voice, the jokes, the humor, just generally seems like a kind soul as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he's like to work with directly. You say he was very don't put these constraints on me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do it my way, but it's going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about, who's the smallest or what kind of, the smallest person that you worked with?
Yeah, I mean, we'll work with. It's funny because in China they kind of differentiate it by KOCs and KOLs, and I don't think that's a concept.
Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, happy to. So it's key opinion creators and then key opinion leaders, and I think KOLs, key opinion leaders, is a term that's used more widely in the West. The slight difference is that within China, or within China marketing teams, KOLs refers to bigger creators, and then KOCs refers to smaller creators. So we've worked with creators with like 1,000 or 2,000 influencers. So what you would call very micro creators. And it will often be that they might start out as a mod, or we're not necessarily giving them money for their time. Perhaps we'll be giving them in-game resources or rewards in other ways whilst they're getting started out. But what works really well there is you can kind of cultivate them within the game's ecosystem so that they grow up putting lots of content out about your game. And then as their following grows, we're then able to support them financially more and more.
So if I understood that correctly, KOS is very KOC is very direct approach. Like they're just focusing on the topic of the content that they're going to put out and then grow their viewership that way.
Yeah, exactly. And it will often be that they're just doing one game.
Right.
So their whole channel is about one game.
Right. Yeah, that definitely rings a few bells for me. Working on different games, there would just be like one YouTuber that just dedicated to picking up every bit of information about the game.
Yeah.
Could be updates or any kind of in-game secrets or strategies, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're right. And so, for example, with ARPGs, a lot of it might be builds and guides, talking about updates, and then analyzing dev update content. So if the devs, they just put out an update blog rather than, some very high quality produced video talk through, it might just be an update on the blog. They'll then go through that blog and that will be their video for the week, is talking through the updates, what it means for players, what we're likely to see different changes in game. And then when the new season comes out, they'll be doing all the different guides and builds.
That's kind of like your number one fan, especially if they're not directly sponsored by the company.
Yeah.
They just do that.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of the free time.
Yeah.
That's great. And KOLs would be somebody with a lot of influence, a lot of followers, and they'll just say, "Hey guys, I'm giving this like shout out to this cool thing that I think is cool, and maybe you guys want to check it out," kind of thing.
Yeah. So for KOLs, I'd say there's two levels to it. There might be the KOL where they're only producing content about your genre of game. So for ARPGs, it might be that they're doing it about Path of Exile, but then also Diablo and a few others. And most of their content would be what we call organic. So it would just be them streaming or playing. But it's not necessarily that the sponsorship would just be a shout out. It might be, we have two levels to it. We call it shout out and dedicated. So shout out is, as you described, thanks to whoever for sponsoring this video. And then they carry on with their content. And then a dedicated might be a dedicated walkthrough of the new season or a let's play. So it can still be more in depth.
You, as well as a person that talks a lot, you have to directly communicate with them or with their agents.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. A lot of the bigger influencers now have agents, and that can make the process slightly more complicated and convoluted unnecessarily, because the KOL often has a better understanding of their audience and the content that would work. And then the problem is you have an agent that might be managing 50 or 100 influencers. And so we ask for some very niche or specific content and they don't really understand it. They take it to the influencer, and it would have been better to just speak to the influencer in the first place. Right. But when they're commanding those bigger tickets, it 100% makes sense for them to have agent representation. Otherwise, for slightly smaller influencers, yeah, we'll be speaking to them directly. Yeah.
Does an agent ever have the power to decline any offers coming in? Is that what they're there for? To filter out the good contracts?
To filter out the shit, essentially. Right. Yeah, and they often would. They might take a look at the influencer's timeline and say, "Oh, they've already got too much sponsored content going out this month, so we're going to pass on it." Sorry, because they might not want to make the influencer's channel too saturated with sponsored content, or they might just know it's not a good fit for them. So, for example, if it's some super casual game and then this influencer only is playing, hardcore dungeon crawling games, it's not a good fit. Forget it. We're not going to piss off our KOL or our KOL by taking it to them.
And you've been doing all of that for more than 4 years, though.
Gosh, yeah, way more. So I started in 2018. So this is my 6th year.
6 years. Wow.
Yeah.
So whilst I had my headphones on, not talking to anybody, you were out and about, making all these connections.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I started in PR. Basically, when I was at university, I did an internship at the BBC News. So that was kind of my first. I actually wanted to do journalism, and that was kind of my first insight to the world of PR and news and media. And from there, fell into PR within the video games industry. But to be honest, most people in the industry, especially within marketing functions, will know that PR is given nowhere near as much emphasis as influencer marketing. So it felt like the right natural progression.
Wow, you're an introvert's biggest nightmare.
Yes.
You just bother them with questions and conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an introvert myself. You can probably tell. But look at my body language. Like I'm so like, I'm trying to put words together. But for you, it's like a little bit more natural.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, different people suit totally different roles. I think I would go crazy in a role where I don't get to talk to people. My energy naturally expels outwards, right? So if I don't have that creative outlet, it's not the right job for me.
Mhm.
But I think for you, you've got that creative side. You're very focused. You can headphones in and, all right, this is a project. Let's get to work. Great. But I feel like you might feel it as draining your energy having to communicate with outside partners too much.
Absolutely.
Great. So then, my job's not right for you and yours isn't right for me. So at least we found what works for us.
Each to their own, I suppose. Yeah, I've noticed this. This is one of my gripes, I guess, with a lot of Chinese game dev, especially for mobile markets, is that, they will have these gigantic buildings with like 2,000 employees and it's huge open space offices and you can bring your cats and dogs depending on the company and stuff like that. And then there'll be the audio department and you're still working in an open space.
Gotcha.
Which sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I get it. They don't want to allocate the budgets to build in rooms and studios and all this kind of stuff. And so you just sit in there with your headphones working in an office as people are walking by and having conversations and meetings right next to you. And to me, that was like the biggest distraction to my process.
And it's one of those funny things where actually what you needed was a soundproof cubicle. But if you weren't visible in the office, I mean, we've both worked in China for a number of years. If you weren't visible at your desk in the office, he's not working. He's bunking off, So you got to be seen doing the work, which sucks because even for me, I'm in meetings all of the time, taking meetings all of the time. And sometimes I just need some quiet space to brainstorm or this, that, and the other. And I remember once I was brainstorming the name for a new game. That was one of my projects at the time. It's a new game, amazing game, didn't know the name for it. And I shut myself off in a meeting room. There was a huge whiteboard and I was just spitballing all over this whiteboard, all of my different ideas. I think I must have gone there after lunch, like 2 p.m. And I remember vividly going back to my desk at like 6 p.m. with some great ideas and loads of logic and research behind it. And my manager was like, "Where have you been?" And the idea was, well, he's just wasted 4 hours. Whereas actually I'd probably saved 2 or 3 days worth of work by being able to hone in on that one thing in my own little world without being distracted by everyone else. Because when you're at your desk, it's, hey, do you want some you want some milk tea? Do you want some snack? Come to this meeting which you're not needed for. But yeah, you know it way too well. That's the Chinese work culture is you got to be at your desk to be doing.
Did you have the receipts? Did you show him the board?
Of course, yeah. I mean, and I was terrified. I'd actually taken a photo of it. Okay. But I was terrified someone was going to go in and wipe off all of this work. But it was, it's this crazy myriad of different ideas. Yeah.
It's funny that you brought up the Chinese work culture, not being present, therefore you're not doing work. I mean, I also have to give credit to Yuzu, actually, out of the 2 companies that I worked in for extended period of time. Yuzu did actually have mixing rooms. They had 3. Right. One was dedicated to our head sound designer. The other one was head composer. And then the other one was for the big boss to check, the final mixes before we send it off for uploading, I guess, for any kind of team that wants it. So they had it. But even though they were there, like sometimes they would just crank up the volume to like get that, Kino feeling.
Yeah.
And you can just hear it from the large offices. Yeah, you can hear the rumble of the bass. And people are like, what the hell's going on in there? And so also when you're editing, you always have to kind of like go back and recheck.
Sure.
So you just be like, a voice line, and then it plays again, and then it plays again, and you can just hear like, huh,
no.
We had a DACA system, right? So for those that don't know, DACA is the check-in system for your clocking in and out of your office. You don't need to say hello to the manager, although you should.
Yeah.
Morning. You got to build that relationship, say hello to your coworkers. But yeah, they don't really need to specifically see you.
I think
for sure they can hear you because they can hear the playback.
I think the very funny thing with DACA, what I found is, I mean, it was it the thumbprint, or you had to actually press your thumb on the system?
It was both. They started doing a phone check-in. It's based on GPS.
Yeah. So when I joined, because I joined before Timmer, so when I joined, it was you had to press your thumb, and then later on you could clock in on your phone. And the stupid thing about that was it had like 100-meter radius around the office, so people would get within 100 meters, not even have to take the lift up to the floor. Great, I'm clocked in. Now time for a coffee and a half an hour cigarette break. So it became counterintuitive, because I think it was one of those things where even when it was clocking in with your thumb, you would see everyone clocking with their thumb, running up the stairs or whatever. And then they just sit at their desk for like 20 minutes scrolling through WeChat or checking Instagram. And then they'd sort of, all right, okay, yeah, maybe now it's time to work. And I think that's not going to change anytime soon. If you want to work in a Chinese office, you just got to get used to that very rigid way of how they measure productivity, right? Because from the moment you're clocked in at 9:30, they're seeing 8, 9, 10 hours of work. Whereas we both know the reality is people are spending a lot of that time on WeChat, on moments.
Yeah.
And then I remember when I first joined the industry, because joining the industry was my first job out of university. And for me, I would have a great day's work. It had been very productive, and I'd kind of be ready to go at maybe 6:37. And I was proud of my work. I knew I'd done enough, right? And then my team was still there, and I was like, what are you guys doing here? I know you don't have anything to do. I know all of your work's done, and you kind of slowly figure out they were waiting for the manager to leave first. Or the other big one was they'd finish work at 6:30, go and get dinner, maybe go and hit the gym, because if they stayed until 9 or 10 o'clock, they could then get a free taxi home and come in half an hour later the next day. But actually they'd already finished any sense of productivity at work at 6:30 p.m. But they're in the office for another 2.5 hours.
But on the system, it looks like they're overtiming.
Looks like they've done a 9 to 9. Yeah. And that's the thing. People talk about Jojo Lil, and if you're 996, Jojo Lil, right? 9 to 9, 6 days a week. And I don't want to take away from the truth that a lot of people in not just the video games industry, but the tech industry are working really long hours. There was a few occasions when I first started in PR and I was really stressed, and I came in on a Saturday. Okay, the office was mostly empty, but there were a few devs guys in there. And my understanding, although it's something I was never that familiar with, is they kind of always had someone on guard or on duty in case there were any issues with the systems. But this idea of Jojo Lil, in my personal experience, is very far-fetched from the truth. The reality is, most people, you've got companies like ByteDance. They're now doing Dazhou, Xiaozhou, 6 days, 1 week, right? 6 days, 1 week, 5 the next, and then 6-5, 6-5. And those kind of companies do have, another one is...
so you have 2 extra days of work in a month.
Exactly, yeah. Another one is Temu. I know they've got 6 days a week, for sure. I know that through what people have told me. But the majority of companies are not putting in those crazy hour expectations anymore.
But people are still kind of following that system, even though they're cheating it. And people will always try to cheat the system. And this is one of the things that was quite frustrating for me, because this whole clocking system is basically saying, we don't trust you.
Yeah.
And you're treating people like children.
Yes.
And when you treat people like children, they will act like children.
They'll go, well, fine. Let's play this game.
Yeah. We're going to clock in, but I've got a story about this actually. But okay. You mentioned that there's a 100-meter radius on the GPS when you're going to clock in at the office. So here's the thing. Yuzu had a different campus about half a kilometer away.
Right.
And just so happens that campus was right above the train line, the train station, the nearby metro system.
I know what you're going to say.
So I could actually arrive by metro from downtown.
Yeah.
And I'm still on the train, just about to get out. And the GPS says, "Oh, you're at the office," because I'm right under the other campus. And it doesn't care which campus you're in because it's a company system.
Yeah.
And I would just clock in and I would slowly, leisurely walk into the office after getting my breakfast.
I think the very interesting thing about this debate, which arose in my personal impression post-COVID, post-lockdown, post that short transition to work from home, was workers complaining, saying, "Hey, I've left the office and my manager's still contacting me." That was a really interesting debate. So say they left the office at 7 p.m. and their manager was still messaging them at 8, 9, 10 o'clock. Super common in Shanghai and China and in that working culture. You basically got to be always online for your manager. And then the tides slowly shifted and workers started to say, "This is my personal time. You can't actually contact me." For example, in France, that's illegal to be contacted after hours. But for years, I don't know about you, but I just swallowed it and accepted it. Oh shit, my manager's contacted me. I've got to reply. It says you'd be at dinner, you'd be on a date, you'd actually be in the cinema or in a gym class, and you'd still feel this pressure to reply, or to deal with it. I remember being out on a Saturday afternoon and my manager asking me to go and tidy up a PowerPoint. So I ran home, send it over. I found out it wasn't even that urgent.
Right. Doing it for the tick. Yeah.
But like I say, the tide's slowly shifting on that one to now where workers are saying, "Hey, it's my personal time." I mean, we're not there yet. It's like a 10% shift, but slowly we're seeing that change.
Yeah, that was for me a bit of a culture shock when I first moved to China. And, we're still going through the initial scare of COVID, even though Shanghai lockdown wasn't that severe in 2020. It was kind of like, please don't go outside, and restaurants, you shouldn't be open, but they were open anyway, and people were doing their own things. And, even with all of that, Shanghai didn't have this huge wave of infections at the time. I remember by April, we were already out in bars.
Yeah.
Whilst everybody else was just going into their respective lockdowns.
That's right. Yeah.
That was wild. But the thing that surprised me, so I'm moving in, I'm getting all my stuff delivered and I need to have internet installed. And it's like a Sunday. And tomorrow's a working day. Like the holiday's already over. And I was with my girlfriend at the time. And she's like, "Oh, yeah, we're just going to call this Shifu, the master, to come in and do something." I'm like, "But it's Sunday, 6 p.m. He's like, "Yeah, no worries." I'm like, "What do you mean, no worries? Is he doing overtime?" No,
Nope.
It's his time off, but he will do it.
Yeah.
And that just shocked me. Like, what the hell is this? Like, you can call people up, whether it's, to get something done, or maybe it's something like an agent that you're dealing with on a Sunday, and just be like, "Hey, is it possible to get this thing done?" You can even say, "I don't need it done right now," but they will still answer the phone. And that is such a wild thing to me, because no way that would happen in Europe.
No, for sure.
Right. So we talked a lot about the company stuff and the work culture. Do you want to tell the story how we met? Because I thought it was pretty funny.
Yes. Yeah, I hated you. No, I'm just kidding. So I'd already been in China for several years at this point, right? So I was not fresh off the boat like you. I was pretty established. I was working in Yuzu, very happy in Shanghai. But for context, it was a Shanghai office and I was the only white guy, and that had both advantages and disadvantages. But we had a company gym, and I was working out in the gym one evening and I saw this other white dude working out with his Chinese buddy. And I was like, "Who is this motherfucker?" And for context, Yuzu occupied about 50% of the actual office building, right? So there were companies on other floors. Maybe they'd rent out one floor, or it would be shared office space. But they didn't have access to the gym. The gym was for Yuzu employees only. And so my assumption was, well, he's probably sneaked in from another floor. What's this guy doing?
Sneaky foreigner.
Yeah, sneaky foreigner. And I had this tight top on, very muscly. And I was like, "Oh, what a dick." And I was almost ready to go and speak to the reception, but then, you skirted off, did your own thing. I was like, all right, fine, whatever. And then my overall impression was, I don't like this guy. He's too handsome. He's getting too much attention.
I remember locking eyes with you. We were in opposite elevators as the doors was closing. And I'm like, a white dude.
Yeah. And I saw a threat to my Laowai identity within the building. So we were walking in opposite directions. It was after work. I assume you must have been walking from the other campus back to our office building, right? And I almost let you walk past me, and then I was like, all right, fuck it, fine, whatever. I'll say hello to this guy. And I was like, hi, mate, I'm Sean, seeing you in the building. And you're like, yeah, hi, nice to meet you. Super friendly. And I remember my first impression, I didn't clock straight away that you were British, right? My feeling is it's crazy how quickly you can form stories in your head.
Mm-hmm.
My story was this guy is international. He's sort of gone to international school and then, maybe spent a few years in the UK just because of your accent was very proper English. And that's when I realized actually you were very fresh in Shanghai. You'd barely been here any time at all. So I was like, okay, whatever.
Just like a wide-eyed tourist.
Yeah, exactly. No idea what's going on, all of the sights and sounds and smells. And I think then we just agreed to go for lunch, right? Go for lunch one day, added WeChat.
You said you portrayed like you were quite resentful or bitter saying hello. But I thought that, this guy was actually really friendly because you're like, oh, hi, excuse me.
Well, that's that fake Britishness coming through, you know?
All right, the fake nice.
Yeah, but the resentfulness was just, this guy's very handsome, and I'd heard other girls talking about you.
No.
But then quickly realized, how much we had in common, and was happy to have a competitor in the building.
Yeah, just keep you on your toes.
Yeah, exactly.
Make sure you come in wearing clean clothes.
Yeah, making sure I was shaving every morning, and doing my hair nice. But yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that I noticed, if we can go back to the work culture. Maybe because it's the game industry, but even at the higher levels, I noticed you don't hear high heels in the office.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, our industry was so unique, and it was one of the things that I found both very enjoyable and fascinating was how far it was from any concept of corporate culture. If you were in any other industry, you could really walk around in flip-flops, in sandals, in shorts, and it blew my mind away. But you're right, the idea of high heels or a suit, if you came in wearing a tie, people would assume you had a job interview that day, or even a collared shirt, I remember one day I had an event in the evening, so I'd come in wearing a shirt during the day to work, and all of my colleagues were like, are you going for an interview? You really shouldn't be making it that obvious. I was like, no, I just got a dinner tonight. But yeah, the whole culture was so relaxed. And for me, starting my career, that suited me perfectly because it meant it was just about the work. It was just about results. No one cares how you look or how you dress. Can you do the work? Can you get the job done?
I find that how you dress sometimes definitely makes a difference to how people perceive you. The saying, clothes makes a man.
Yeah.
When they give off the aura of the boss and commanding respect or, trying to get anything serious done and meeting somebody from the outside the company, but, they're wearing sports clothes. I think it can kind of send the wrong message.
I know exactly what you mean. I completely agree with you. And I think there are very subtle ways in which you can get this wrong. So, for example, slippers or, wearing sliders in the office was incredibly common. But especially when you're starting to work quite longer days and it can get scorching hot in Shanghai.
I fell into that for sure.
Yeah. And so I remember one day I was wearing sliders. Basically, you would just leave them at the office and kind of slip into them during the working day and put on your proper shoes when you're ready to leave. And I went up to the top floor one day to get a really big payment signed off by the finance department. And I bumped into the VP's assistant, Lulu, right? And I bumped into her in the elevator. She was like, it's the top floor in sliders. And I was like, oh, no, yeah, you're right.
Really... she caught you up?
Yeah. And I think that was right. She was right to do that. But, you kind of fall into a habit of being so used to that.
Right.
That sometimes you fail to catch yourself. Yeah.
Making friends in China has been quite a challenge, especially not because it's China, but because being an expatriate or an expat, when you live in a big city where people are constantly in and out, and some people say people use Shanghai as a springboard for their career, and I can see why some Chinese people can be slightly resentful of that.
Yeah.
And then some people is just, that's where the journey took them. Like me, for example, I ended up here, not by coincidence, but it wasn't a planned move.
Sure.
Like there was no strategy. Oh, I'm going to come to China and I'm going to open a studio here. It's going to be life on easy mode. It's actually quite the opposite. It's life on hard mode, especially if you don't have language fluency and all this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously you're much better than me. You've put in your hours behind the textbooks. So because people are always in and out, you never know how long your friends are going to be there. And so I started to notice that some people either don't put in the effort into the relationships, or they put in the effort and then they end up being disappointed because the friends they leave. The time has come to an end.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they have to go. You could also say, well, why don't you just make friends with the locals? Yes, fuck you. Because again, language difficulties. And you could, and I have made friends with the locals that can speak English, or maybe somebody's English is not very good, which has actually been a good challenge for me.
Yeah.
Practicing my Chinese. And they always say, you need to learn more. I'm like, yes, I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I need to. So you're at the place where people are always coming and going, and it's so hard to find a relationship or a friendship where, you feel like you can rely on that person. What has it been like for you?
Yeah, you made a couple of really good points that I completely agree with. And I think the way you described it is correct, but it's the opposite way around. So what happens is when people first move to Shanghai, they develop some very close and warm friendships, whilst you might argue they're a bit naive. Then they get disappointed when those friends end up leaving. And so then they become more resentful or less willing to form very deep friendships because they know they're going to get disappointed when that person ends up leaving. I always felt honored when I was able to make friends with the locals, most of which came in the workplace, and whenever anyone said, hey, you want to grab a bite to eat? And, we weren't necessarily friends at that point, or we weren't friends yet, and they would take you out or introduce you to their friends, whether it was to KTV or for a coffee. It was incredibly kind, and I was really, really honored and heartfelt by those gestures.
Yeah.
And I really put in effort to cultivate those friendships. And the reason I say that is I would say the majority of locals, for whatever reason, it might have been shyness or the language barrier or assumptions, just weren't that interested in making friends with you. So they either, perhaps weren't that willing to make friends with you, or it was just for eating and drinking. There's actually an expression in Chinese called 酒肉友, which 酒, alcohol, 肉, meat, friendship. So it was those typical city friendships, which is not unique to Shanghai. You'll see it in New York or London as well, where it's just, hey, we're all going for dinner. And you would see these groups of like 15 or 20 expats, essentially, or more international local Chinese, all at a table eating. And if you asked them to name one detail about someone else at the table, they wouldn't have been able to. They just knew, oh, that's Sally, that's Jim. And we just all had dinner together. And I think that was a way to cure loneliness. And what I found in the end was you just had to become much more internationally minded with your friendships. I found it crazy when I would leave Shanghai for a period of time. We know this from personal experience. Some friendships not ours, but some friendships you just wouldn't speak whilst you were away. But then when you'd come back to Shanghai, you'd pick up right where you left off. Right. And then it was the minority. It was one or two that you would really keep in touch with whilst you were away.
Everything that we just talked about and my frustration with people leaving, that's exactly what happened to you. Like you left, you had your own things going on.
Yeah.
And I wasn't saying that with any kind of spitefulness.
Yeah.
Like I get it, life goes on. But it was I also caught myself thinking like, man, I haven't spoken to Sean in a while. Like I wonder what's going on there. And then like you would message me the next day.
Right.
And like, oh, snap, we're still doing it. We're still in business.
Doing the thing. Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing you mentioned about, locals either being shy or not being interested to make friends with you. I've noticed that sometimes you kind of want to be friendly with people and then you just kind of get a cold shoulder.
Yeah, sucks.
And I was trying to figure this one out. Like, is it because I'm sending like the wrong vibe, or did I say something wrong? And then I just think some people they just don't like you, or they just don't want to be friends.
Yeah.
Or
So
you know.
for me personally, I just want to add one note: is I was always incredibly apprehensive about making any first move friendship vibes with females, because I was hugely aware that something could come off in the wrong way, and I that's just not a Pandora's box that I wanted to open. The other thing I found with anyone over the age of 25, they just had so much shit going on in their life. You know, Chinese people after university, they throw themselves at life. Marriage, kids, the whole works, you know, get the house, get the car. For us, 25, life's just getting started. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no cash, you know, I was here, there, and everywhere. So you're just super chill. Like, life's still plain sailing to some extent. I mean, you've got no money, but you're just, you're much more transient, right? Whereas I found a lot of people over 25 are getting married, having kids. They just don't have time for friends. You know, they might even like you, but when are they going to see you? Right? They've just got so much going on. I feel like a lot of the people I met, they were just so busy and in such a state of chaos. I'm not using chaos in a negative connotation. They just didn't have the time for it. You know, maybe they were interested. And the other thing I found, I have connections here. There's one guy I work with at the moment. We've never hung out outside of a work or collaboration setting. And he said to me the other day, he said, I always love seeing your WeChat moment updates. And I was like, oh, really? He was like, yeah, I love seeing what you're up to. I find it so interesting. And I was like, but you've never asked to hang out or like really speak to me about this. All we've ever spoken about is work. Mm-hmm. But I found out all of my WeChat moment stuff he's been keeping up with religiously, almost like a blog, you know?
It's like getting to know you through the other side of Sean.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. It's kind of a good thing as well. People, you have that opportunity, the window of opportunity to, well, have a window into somebody else's life, unless you filter people out. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a setting in WeChat.
There is.
To change, to see who can see, to set who can see your posts and stuff like that. I don't bother with that. That's too much.
Oh, I do it. Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, sometimes when I'm going to regret saying this in the past, not now. When I was on holiday but meant to be working, you know, I just make sure my work.
Oh, that's understandable. Right? Okay, yeah. So you separate like the work people entirely sensitive things, right? Okay, I get it. That's fine. How many groups do you have?
There's 2 work groups. There's basically like the old work group that are now allowed to see again when I'm on holiday because we just don't work together anymore. And there's the new work group, and then there's friends. Yeah.
You ever posted anything that I wasn't supposed to see? It's a little shit test.
I don't think so. I mean, not that I can think of.
We never worked directly anyway, so it's never.
Yeah, and also like we're buddies first. You're not gonna go to my manager and say, you know, Sean hasn't come back from Sanya yet. You know, saying he's ill, that's bullshit.
Yeah, let me just look for you in the what was it, like 24th
floor.
24th floor building. Like, when does Sean work again?
Yeah.
Right. So we've both been in China for a long time, and we mentioned the good parts and the difficulties of making friends. Have you ever encountered any racism?
Yes. Racism's a very loaded word. So before I answer your question, I want to explain what it means to me, right? Because I've got Asian friends in the UK that have truly experienced racism, which is verbal abuse or physical attack. And that is just a million, billion, trillion times worse than anything I've ever experienced. I've never been physically attacked because I'm white, okay, you know, in my time in China. I just want to make that as clear as possible. Nonetheless, I have received different treatment for being white, for sure.
We're not talking about any bureaucratic processes, just like from the government when your passport doesn't work.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. So one experience that comes to mind is during Sanya. I was on a trip to Sanya with Blake and a few other friends in 2021. So it is important to note this was during the COVID pandemic, and a lot of the policies take time to filter through the system, right? So it'll be announced and then it will trickle down to local government management. And what had happened is there were restrictions on foreigners' movements. So we'd found ourselves in Sanya somehow. And like if we'd flown a few days later, we wouldn't have been allowed on the plane. But there we were in Sanya. And then the nightclubs were open.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'd actually booked a table because it was Joyce's birthday. So she, she's Chinese, right? And I'd booked a table at the club to celebrate her birthday with us now, all of our friends. And we rocked up, and the Chinese people were getting let in. And it was actually a separate, they'd asked us to stand to one side, and they said, sorry, you guys aren't coming in. And we said, why? And they just straight up said, because you're foreigners, And I was to the point, I was so shocked to the point I almost thought they were joking.
Mhm.
And they said, sorry, we can't let foreigners in. I guess telling the story out loud, that doesn't sound like racism. It wasn't like, fuck you, you're white. It was more of a policy thing or a misunderstanding thing or a protecting their own back thing.
The policies still comes from a prejudiced place.
Yeah.
So.
And the other example that stands out in my mind that I believe, maybe some internet nerd can correct me once they see this, that they've changed really recently but until really recently, there were a bunch of hotels that just wouldn't let foreigners stay in them in China.
Oh, I heard about that.
One example was I was between moving apartments and I wanted to stay in one for a few days whilst my new apartment wasn't ready yet. And it was like, sorry, no foreigners. And I was like, why? It took me ages to get to the bottom of it. As far as I can tell, it was an insurance thing.
It's exactly what I heard as well.
Yeah.
It's they just don't have the insurance to cover foreign residents.
Which they can pay for.
They can, but cutting corners. Also, COVID times, hotels were definitely suffering in terms of income.
Yeah.
So they're just like, we're not going to do that. Just cut everyone off.
Yeah.
I can wholeheartedly say 0. I have never had any kind of slight
Right.
or any direct confrontation to do with race.
Right.
And I don't know if it's just my luck or there was any kind of deterrent or just the people that happened to have met me just never happened. There was that one occasion actually when me and you went to the bar, to the club, and they said, we're not sure, like it's kind of full or you guys are foreigners.
Yeah.
And then what did you say? 没问题，我们都是中国人.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
so we're all foreigners. Sorry, we're all
Yeah.
Chinese. No
Yeah.
worries. And
Yeah.
the security guy laughed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great way to diffuse the situation. This is why you need an extrovert.
And a Mandarin speaking extrovert.
Mandarin speaking extrovert. Yeah. That definitely scored a few brownie points with those guys. But yeah, no, generally my experience, I've made a few Chinese friends and they were all just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, super generous, super hospitable.
Yeah.
Incredibly kind. And like I said earlier, I took those gestures really seriously, and it was a big honor. I've got half a dozen or a dozen very close Chinese friends now, and I'm really appreciative. And I look back on the memories I've had with them very fondly, very happily. Johnny, Lulu, Nikki, and Tutu, right? Like
all very Chinese names.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, getting invited to Tutu's wedding, that was my first Chinese wedding, and that was an incredible experience. That was really cool. Chinese people know how to have a good time. Yeah. And I think that's a funny one, right? Is because for me, growing up in the UK, having fun was drinking. Just going to some dumb house party, drinking Strongbow, and then passing out. And then I kind of came to China with the same mentality. All right, let's go to the pub, let's go to the club. And then you just sit there and talk for hours, But when you go to the club here, they've got the dice, they've got all these games going on. It's much more interactive, right? I would, and the card stuff. I would say as a culture, they know how to have more real fun.
I would argue with you on that one.
Please.
I think it depends on the people. I've seen many situations where people go to the club. I know we keep saying clubs. I've seen also bars.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'll just be a group of friends. Somebody will be smashing the dice in the cup.
Yeah.
And everyone else will just be on their phones.
As soon as you said that, my body language straight away went to, yeah, I could just picture everyone on their phones. I know what you mean to an extent. I still stand by my statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I perhaps rephrase that? What you mean is they have ways of having good fun.
Sure.
Not everybody does.
Fine.
And for us, especially like as outsiders, seeing their games and the things that they do are quite unique and entertaining.
Yeah.
I mean,
and there's a novelty
entertaining.
to it as well.
Yeah.
Even with the KTV, the singing, I would never have gone singing in my life before coming here.
KTV, you mean the karaoke?
Yeah.
I still cannot do it. I've got one to go to this weekend. And the guy said, I'm expecting some metal screaming for the songs. I'm
Just
like,
bring out one Chinese song, you know?
I want to do the 朋友 song.
朋友月亮代表我的心，因为爱情. There's 3 super easy
我们
ones
也
for
爱情。
you. Yeah. So this studio,
Mhm.
I don't know much about sound design.
Uh-huh.
It looks pretty epic. It looks like something you'd see in, you know, a movie biopic about some star. We've got the room behind the cameras, which is your control room and your main office, and then all of this soundproof stuff going here.
Mhm.
Talk me through it. Like, what's going on here, and what is Flying Juice?
This wasn't built by me. First had an office that didn't work out for me because it was just a horrible location for audio. And then I saw in a sound people, engineers, you know, designers group chat that the previous owner was selling the studio, and I was like,
Nice.
yeah, okay, this is pretty much my one and only shot. Otherwise, I have to rebuild the whole thing myself, and that could cost God knows how much more.
So the dream is you're going to be doing all of your work for clients here, which will mostly be in this room or that room.
Yeah, so this room is gonna be great for voiceover artists. You know, I can see them directly from there. We can communicate with headphones and stuff like that. And any kind of Foley work. In case you don't know, Foley is when they make sounds using items.
Yeah.
And I'm not really a hoarder. I'm a minimalist.
Yeah.
But this profession is turning me into a hoarder, because I will just see a random junk line in the basement. I'm like, oh, this is like a great little old robot or something like that. So I'll take that and like collect shards of broken glass and these kinds of things. So yeah, it's very cool job, but I'm not necessarily a Foley artist. I want to focus on the broad aspect of sound design and post-production. So it'll be anything from voice to guns and magic stuff and this kind of stuff.
So with the studio being based in Shanghai, I mean, your experience previously was working with 2 Chinese video game studio and then 1 previously in the UK.
Yes, yeah, they're UK based.
And then going forward, do you have any kind of concept or vision about what type of clients you'd like to be working with?
The clients that I want to work with is definitely video game people.
Right.
I think that's my bread and butter. I understand it pretty well. I'm by no means, you know, an audio director for a AAA company. That's like a completely different levels of experience. And you need to know programming and, you know, all these acoustic concepts and planning and team management, all these things. I think I just want to really sort of hunker down and get creative with the things that I can make.
Nice.
Or we as a studio as well.
Where in the production process will you join your clients?
Easy. Ideally as early as possible.
Gotcha. That's something that's different to how I envisaged it then. Gotcha.
Because it gives us, like the audio creators, it gives us the time to really understand the concept, the brief, or it gives us the opportunity to nudge certain creative aspects, visual aspects.
Wow.
With the audio, with the power of audio. So we could say like, hey man, maybe this thing could build up this tension this way, so you don't need to rely on a camera this way.
So it's almost like you're working alongside them throughout the process. So for example, in the example you just gave, the actors know what they're reacting to rather than just chucking it in post-production.
Exactly.
Wow. So what's technically, from a technical point of view, what's the most complicated project you've ever worked on?
Most complicated, I think it definitely have to be Ready or Not.
Right. Okay.
Purely because we didn't really want to rely too much on the libraries. And we did start off with some libraries, and I did a job. Mind you, this was like 6 years ago already. And it was okay, but it wasn't great. And we had a lot of players say, this doesn't feel as powerful, it's a bit bland, or it doesn't quite feel right. Not everybody, but a vocal minority. And I think they definitely had a point, because they are gun enthusiasts. So the game is about police and guns, and they really know their stuff. So they would say, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't feel like a gun. And it's not that they were saying, make it sound like Call of Duty. That's not what they were saying. They just say like, it doesn't feel right. So then, okay, I kind of took an L And we talked to the directors and said, we need somebody who really knows their guns. And we found this fella who lives out like nearly on a ranch somewhere, and he has guns and a small little microphone. He didn't need big equipment, and he just recorded clean audio for the guns.
Wow.
And it was perfect. And then when he layered it, I'm like, I want to, what sort of studio does he use? What sort of software? Basic Audacity.
Wow.
And he just he started delivering all these gun sound effects, which had to be chopped down and layered. He had the reflections, the initial kick of the gun, all this kind of stuff, and it just sounded so big and noisy, but not like distortion noisy. And I was like, this is great. Be using that. Hey, do you remember those technical difficulties? Do you remember those technical difficulties I've mentioned at the beginning of the video? Well, this is one of them. We lost quite a bit of ending footage because we just decided to record on our phones, and turns out phones don't like recording in 4K for a very long time, and they will inevitably corrupt the videos. So we don't have an outro. We know, but we didn't say goodbye the proper way, but we did in real life. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we're gonna do more in the future. Peace.